Hi there, welcome back to Tiff Reads Books. I'm Tiff and I read books and then I talk to you about them. It took me a little bit this week to figure out what book I wanted to talk to you about because I've read a few, but I think I need to vent about this one. So I picked up a free audiobook called Domesticating Dragons because I had just finished listening to both The Long Walk, followed immediately by Misery, and I was like, okay, I need something light and silly and then I'll start The Shining. So I picked up this free Audible book in the Plus section called Domesticating Dragons, like I just said, by Dan Kobold. Part of why I picked it up is because I thought it was funny that his name is Cobalt, DT, and a kobold without the T on the end is this. It's a tiny dragon-esque anthropomorphic creature in the D&D realms and probably some other areas of fantasy RPGs as well, but I know them from D&D, and I was like, this is just too entertaining, so I'm going to pick this up. The reviews on Audible were pretty good. So this was supposed to be a story about a young man who has just finished his PhD. He is going to start working for a company called Reptilian Corp, and what Reptilian Corp does is they produce dragons. So we're set in the near future where feral hogs have taken over. And I just kept thinking about that feral hogs joke from years ago. So anyway, and they can't really get away to deal with the feral hogs. So they decide, as like the government decides, to go ahead and invest in this Reptilian Corp company who is going to start making dragons specifically designed to hunt feral hogs. And they're going to release them where the feral hogs are so that the dragons kill them. So this is always your standard ecological practice in history that goes wrong, is introduction of another species to manage an invasive species. It always goes wrong historically in ecological ways. Lots of examples of that I could give you, but that's not what we're here for. This is the gist of the story, and so our main character starts working for this company. That was the little skim of the synopsis that I read, and then I scrolled down to the reviews. There was only a few of them posted on Audible. Let me pull up the data for you. So there were 27 ratings. Only a few of them actually had verbal reviews, and it had above a 4.2 star. I'm the only person who rated this low, and it dropped the review down. So it was above a 4 star. I then checked Goodreads quickly, and Storygraph. Goodreads had it 3.8, Storygraph had 3.4, somewhere around there. Again, my review dropped these scores because there's not very many of them. But there was 200 and something ratings on Goodreads and only 24 on Storygraph. So I was like, okay, so a few people have read this book, and it sounds pretty good. The reviews were on Audible about how this was hilarious and amazing, and this writer was now one of their favorites, and I was like, okay, so a good, light-hearted audiobook. It's only 11 hours. I was very upset at this book. This book was not good. It was not good, okay? So, and this is frustrating because the author is actually a scientist. I went to his website and he talks about how he's a geneticist. So he does understand what he's talking about from the science perspective. However, that bled into our main character being very arrogant and always assuming he was the smartest person in the room, but he was in a room full of other very experienced and equally educated scientists working in his field. And he still presumed that everybody needed his help in order to succeed. Our main character, Noah Parker, first gets on at this company by letting them test his biosimulator. So what this does is you put in a DNA code and it pops you up a 3D image of a thing, whatever the code is for that thing. So our main character presents his simulator to someone who is the head of design. What design does is they take a DNA code and they design a dragon. This was explained in a very interesting way, which I'll get to in a second. So she looks at his simulator and decides she's going to get the hiring freeze to stop so that she can bring him on, which is odd because you already just paid for his product. You don't need him because his product is designed to be user-friendly so that anybody can use it. So I don't see the purpose of needing him, but she decided that he was so intelligent in his interview, where he actually was arrogant and asshole-ish, that she needed to bring him on. So she brings him on, and he immediately becomes the best designer that they have using their dragon design program, because he spent like 70 hours in his first week rewriting all the code for the design program that the person who hired him made, and making it better, because apparently her code was clunky and the images that it was producing were pixelated and not very accurate. So what this simulator combined with her program does is you basically choose a genetic code and you drop it in, and then this design program shows you what a dragon with that code will look like. Then there are like scale points where you can only put so many points into intelligence, into strength, and I was like, okay, so it's a builder from a video game, basically, because when you're building a character in video games, you get like a slider bar for like certain things, and when you're doing an RPG game, some of the older ones where you get like points that you get character points for every level, and you can only put them into so many things. So if you get a pool of points, and you do this with RPG design too, when you're designing a D&D character, a lot of people will do point buy. So you get a pool of points, and you can put so many points into different traits for your character so that they're balanced. So we have to make a balanced dragon within a school of points. And I was like, okay. So I'm just imagining basically, and he's describing it as a slider bar. You slide like wing size this way, and then body size scales differently with it. You can't have like a huge dragon with huge wings. If you have a big dragon, you have little wings. If you have big wings, you have a little dragon type of thing, because you can't have more points into it. And I was like, and he spent so much time describing this and how this looked that I was like, this is really just what he wanted to write about. So thing is, Noah gets on this company, and now he's doing amazing, and everyone looks up to him and needs him for help. So we find out that the company wants to design dragons for a domesticated pet dragon, and they're struggling with it. So the woman brought him on because she was hoping that he could adjust his simulator to simulate behavioral traits. So here's the thing. Behavioral traits and genetics are a very messy science, because environment has a big impact on the development of behaviors, and we know that from lots of studies of animals, of non-human animals. There's rat studies galore on how maternal deprivation affects behavioral traits. So you can have a very docile animal, give it a fucked up environment, and end up with an aggressive animal. So the premise of this is frustrating. There's a little bit of a conversation of this at the end of the book about how the main character says, it's so weird that I have all these genetically identical animals that behave entirely different. It's not weird. It's normal. It's how nature works. So that part aside, that frustration aside, I can let it go. It's a book. It's a novel. I can let go of suspend my disbelief and move on past that. But that was one of those things where I was like, okay, so we're leaning heavily into genetics. So the reason that Noah is at this company, that from his perspective, is his younger brother has a degenerative muscle disease, and he wants to cure it, because in the future that we are in, you have to allow your genome to be viewed in order to figure out where your phenotypical, so your physical traits come from in your genotype. So we have a genotype to phenotype. So your genotype is your DNA, and your phenotype is your physical expression of your DNA. However, like I said, there's a big impact of environment onto phenotype. So this is where another thing that I was like, well, that I could probably see the medical field trying to go that way, but I could also see a big pushback from that. So it's an interesting type of almost dystopian type future, very Gattaca, where you have to have your DNA analyzed constantly and make it publicly available for anybody to look at. Because his little brother has a new type of mutation that has resulted in the same phenotype of this muscular degenerative disease that is unnamed, they won't let him enter any trials because he possibly doesn't actually have it, even though he's presenting all of the symptoms. So Noah wants to get an animal model with his brother's genetic variation that they can prove that in other animals it results in the same physical trait. But we're in a future where animal models have been essentially banned or locked down very, very tight. And this is partially because of a tumor disease in dogs, where dogs get tumors all around their muzzles and eventually succumb to the stress on their body from it. And that this started to be widespread. So we don't have pet dogs in this world anymore. We have a few high-end breeders who've locked their dogs away and aren't breeding them or allowing any other dog to interact with them because of the way that it spreads. So that creates a hole in the economy for a small domesticated pet. So people started picking up pigs and guinea pigs and hamsters and more cats, and all sorts of other animals increased in ownership. I did kind of like the line of pigs becoming the new pet. So because of that, Noah starts working for this company, and he's like, okay, if I could get a dragon that does that, then we could test on that dragon, because dragons in this world, because of the way they're created, are not covered under the ethics boards for study in the same way that other animals are. And this again requires a suspension of disbelief, because we've had these dragons in the world. At this point, I would think animal rights movements are going to start pushing to have some sort of ethics on these animals. And one of the reasons that they haven't, apparently, is that the dragons are given a 2-week lifespan. They are created entirely artificially, very Jurassic Park, including like the whole, like basically you punch in your DNA code that you want, and then a machine squirts out an egg that has your dinosaur inside of it. And again, they've pulled from a bunch of other animals, same as very similar to Jurassic Park, to make this egg type of thing. So, and then they've given them a shortened lifespan where they only live for 2 weeks. So this is them getting around the that dragons becoming an invasive species, because they only can live for 2 weeks, supposedly. So that's the other thing that we have to change now, is make a longer lived dragon so they can be domesticated. Where am I going with this? No animal rights activists have been mentioned or gotten involved in this at all, which is another suspension of disbelief for me, because there is zero way that a company could produce something like a dragon, patent it, and have it be sentient, not a robot, and not have animal rights activists losing their shit. In this case, kind of rightfully so, because we are making a whole living, thinking, breathing creature designed for a sole purpose, and then having it die immediately after. Which is a very... Yeah, so essentially we are putting them under the same regulations as we put lab bacteria strains or Drosophila strains. I struggled with that idea of this world. So I'm already iffy on the world building. And then the fact that Noah thinks he's going to be able to, in a major corporation, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, be able to somehow sneak in a dragon design that he can take home and study on his own, when the company has a patent on that animal. So Dan, as a scientist, as a genetic scientist, should understand that companies that have patents on their animals, Glowfish are one of them. You've probably seen them in a pet store. If you're in the US and you've gone to a large chain pet store, you've probably seen these. They're called Glowfish, Glowfish, with a copyright symbol by them, because their genetic code is copywritten. These animals are not dyed like other animals that are. I'll show some other fish that are dyed. These ones are dipped in dye. The Glowfish are not dipped in dye. They have a genetic variation inserted into them that makes them naturally this color. So they're not tattooed, they're not dyed, they're not injected. They just are this way. They exist in the public because they are not supposed to be bred, but you cannot breed these fish as a hobbyist. If they breed in your tank, fine, but if you get caught selling them, they are copyrighted. You cannot sell them. You can't create them and sell them. So literally, even in the real world, it would be so difficult to do what he thinks he's going to do. Okay, so that's the plot issues that I have that's spoil free. That's all in the very first couple of chapters. So that is all spoil free. Okay, my issue with Noah as a character is that immediately from the first few lines of the book, we know what kind of person he is. As soon as he walks in to the building for his interview, he comments on how attractive the 20-year-old receptionist is and immediately starts to try to hit on her and believes that he has successfully hit on her. That's our introduction to this character. Our second introduction is to him making some kind of vague comments, woman interviewing him. And then a little while later, we get more misogynistic comments that lean more towards misogyny, where we start talking about the crazy ex-girlfriend of his who was an artist and wore all black, and our big scene of showing how mentally unstable she is and how their relationship was so toxic is that he gets a call while they're watching a movie, and he excuses himself to take the call, and she's like, could you just call them back after the movie? And he's like, no. And he walks out the front door. And he takes the call and he finds out it's his mom and his brother's in the hospital. So instead of walking inside and saying, hey, my brother's in the hospital, I really gotta go, he leaves. He just gets in his car and leaves because it's super important that he goes to see his brother right this moment in the hospital. And I understand that. But politeness, especially to your partner, to your girlfriend, whether you call them partner or not, but your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever you are watching with, even if you're just watching a movie with a friend or an acquaintance, the polite thing to do is to say, hey, I have an emergency, I really have to go, I can't explain it right now, but I will catch you up as soon as I can, I really need to go. No, he doesn't do that, he just leaves. And so then he comes back a couple hours later and just walks into her apartment like nothing happened, and she's like, what the fuck, why'd you just leave? And he's like, oh, well, some things are more important than you. And that's because, she was like, well, you could have told me you were leaving. Like, you could have just said something to me. You just left. And he's like, oh, you never understand. You never care about my brother. And I'm like, bitch, you did not tell her what you were doing. How is she the toxic one in this situation? And you're trying to write her off as super toxic. And then he breaks up with her because she didn't understand that he needed to leave. And that's our one example of how horrible she is. Our next example... Okay, that's our first example. Our second one is that he leaves his hard drive with all of the backup of his PhD in her apartment, which is fucking stupid. But the whole point of it was so that he could go back and get his hard drive, and we get an interaction of the super hot, but also kind of a rave girl, and also doesn't really like him roommate. We had to get our introduction to her. So she doesn't want to let him in, rightfully so, because he's like, oh, I just need to go into her room and go into her closet and get my thing. And she's like, well, she's not here. I can't let you into her room. And that means that she's a bitch, because she's like, oh, I can't let you into, my roommate's space when she's not there. Therefore, this roommate, whose name is Summer, is apparently a super bitch for not letting him in. But she eventually does, because he's polite to her and says, please. So she lets him in to go get his thing. So as he's getting his hard drive, the ex, Jane, comes in. She comes in and she's like, what the fuck are you doing in my closet? And he's like, see, she was such a bitch. And I was like, what? And then, so he pulls out his hard drive and he's like, okay, I'm leaving. And she's like, oh, that's all you came for, really? And apparently and then she gets like a little emotional and kind of like cries a little bit. And he's like, oh, she was so toxic. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's our opinions on women in this book. And then that leads into a woman with an Indian name, Preeti, who gets given a very thick Indian accent in the audiobook, though we have no idea why, if she's actually from India or if she's an American, she's here. We have no she just has an ethnic name. And then she's super smart. She's the smartest and the most desired employee, but she has to go to Noah for help. And he makes fun of her for being a vegetarian. because he's a meat eater. He gets meat on everything. And he's been asked a couple of times to make a vegetarian dragon, and it hurts him in his soul to do it. Because meat is important. And so the girl he falls for, Summer, is like, oh, I have to eat meat every day. If I don't eat meat every day, I could just die. So this is the type of, yeah. And that makes her a badass, along with the fact that she drives a Jeep with no doors and doesn't respect curbs. Therefore, she's a badass. Oh, and she wears hiking boots 95% of the time, except for when she wants to, like, show off, and then she wears strappy sandals. So, you know, she's cool. So, there was so much misogyny in here, and then there was a lot of microaggressive racism, like, not like, you know, overt, like, talking shit about people of different races, but comments about how all the Chinese people in Arizona know each other because they're all immigrants from the same area, and they all have this, like, really strong work ethic where they never sleep and they never leave because that's the work ethic of their place, and they want to stay in the US so they don't have to go back to that place because it's so much worse living conditions. So we have all of that, which is great, sarcastically, if that wasn't clear. And then, okay, the last thing that drove me nuts was, well, not the last thing, the second to last thing, was after Noah breaks the domestication sequence and gets the company to start being able to domesticate dragons, he gets this big bonus check. So he decides to get a really nice condo and a Tesla. And then from then on, it's never called his car. He never says, oh, my car. He says, oh, my Tesla. Every single time it says Tesla. We get so much description of this Tesla, from the way the driving system works, from the way that, like, the doors make a specific sound when they open. We get descriptions of a detailed description of the alarm system, of the interior, of the voice of the Tesla, of the whole computer system. We get details of how to turn off the autopilot, and it honestly read like a Tesla ad. Dude wants, like, you to know that he loves Elon's cars. So that was fun for me. Honestly, I was so annoyed. And then in the very last bit of the book, there is a throwaway about making pit bulls the villain, and about how animal rescues will often label a dog of unknown ancestry as a terrier, and the terrier typically means pit bull. And about how somebody got a pit bull, not knowing that it was a pit bull, had the dog for 4 or 5 years, and then one day it snapped on the neighbor's kids and killed a kid. And that's a story that we get in this book for no reason. Literally no reason. So that was fun for me as well. There is an undercurrent of ableism in here as well, where Noah does not listen to his younger brother. His whole goal is to fix his younger brother. And his younger brother is, like, not upset about his condition. Obviously, if you have, you know, something chronic, you're going to have opinions and stuff on how you feel daily and all that type of stuff. But he keeps arguing with Noah that he doesn't want him to do it. He doesn't want him to spend all this time doing this. He doesn't want to be his pet project, which I think is a valuable opinion. And Noah just stomps right over that. Just completely disregards it because he can't handle the idea of seeing his brother in a wheelchair. He's, like, so upset over this wheelchair that he refuses to listen to his younger brother and his opinions about it, and treats him like a child. His younger brother is a full-grown adult in college, and he has another line where he doesn't want his younger brother to have access to the door lock codes in their house because of his condition. But why should he not have access to the door locks? Like, he's an adult who lives at home and stays home by himself when his mother is at work. Or apparently always on a wine tour. We have that super involved but also super alcoholic wine mom is in there as well, which is just another level of misogyny. So this isn't spoilery, this is just me bitching. So he doesn't listen to him, just refuses to listen to him at all over what his brother would want or what he wants or doesn't want. He just decides he knows best. So that's great. This book is trash as far as that goes. The plot was okay for a lighthearted plot. Evil corporation does backhanded things and shady tactics. In the middle of it, we get these customer service calls where customers call in with complaints or issues with their dragons, and we kind of find out that the dragons are more often than not eating house cats when they're not supposed to be like aggressive towards house cats. But this gets brushed off as people being stupid and fat. So our first customer that calls in too is complaining about this, like the weight of her, like her dragon's too big, and she's like complaining, and we get tons of fat shaming and diet culture pushed onto her as well. So that's cute. I loved that. And of course, because she was fat, she had to be dumb as well, because you can only be fat if you're dumb. So that was really fun for me. And then the other few customer service calls are people having aggressive dragons that, like, one, basically just them hiding that the dragons are more aggressive than they say they are. So it's kind of like hinting at the corporation being shady. And then of course we get the super shady reveal of like this compound. Okay, so this is the spoiler, right? Okay. So basically Noah discovers that there's like a secret plot going on in this company. And he does that by going out to the desert, finding this compound where he discovers that it's the farm is what they call it, where they take all of the imperfects, essentially, or the unwanteds or the returns. So they take them all out here and they lock them up in cages or they kill them depending on what's wrong with them. So in the middle of this whole center compound full of dogs that have been cured of this tumor disease. Now here's the thing. The owner of the company, the main owner, because there was two and they ousted one, so he doesn't have any like sort of say in what happens, but he's still got shares. But the other one is the corporate greed guy, and his whole thing is that he's pushing the dragon domestication because he hates dogs. He hates dogs and he wants to not have them anymore, even though he discovered a vaccine that will cure. So it's not a vaccine, it's a treatment, but they call it a vaccine. It's a treatment that will cure this tumor disease. Potentially they made a vaccine too. But once the dogs have the tumor disease, they get the vaccine and it goes away. So there's no difference here between vaccine and treatment. They're both the same thing in the story. So he discovered that at his previous company and then left the company with all of the patent and everything for that and saying that it never worked, apparently. But he kept all the dogs that he cured in the center of this compound where they were killing dragons. So my question is, if you were trying to hide the fact that you cured a disease, why would you keep the evidence? If you have already shown you hate animals and you're okay killing them, why would you keep those dogs alive? Especially if you decided, because I could see it being like, oh, well, someday I want to, maybe I'll want to revert back and sell my treatment, right? Okay, so you just keep all the records of how to make your treatment. You don't need to keep the dogs. Why did we keep the dogs? So that our hero could stumble upon them is literally the only reason that we kept them. It doesn't make any sense logically. Like, if you're the person who is this evil and you're trying to hide this thing that you've done, why would you keep the evidence? Tell me, because I don't understand. And this, so of course, okay, so Noah figures this all out, and then he runs to his mom's house to hide there. and two of the dragons swoop down so that he's allowed to take a biopsy from them, and then they disappear. So he gets his biopsy, and then he gets cornered by the owner, who is like, I'll give you two options. One is I like bump you up to like head of design or something, like give you this huge promotion and give you a seat on the board and you never tell anyone. Or two, you go public and I sue the shit out of you. So that's our last scene. And then suddenly we jump to like a newscaster or it sounded like a newscaster reporter thing, but it's probably just like a narration where the cure for the disease for the dogs had been published, and Greaves, the guy who did all the problematic shit, was in jail, and dogs were back in people's lives. And then he gets a phone call from the woman who hired him, and she's like, I want to have lunch with you. So he invites his girlfriend too, and then he gets an offer to take her position on the board, like on her previous position as like head of design. So we have no explanation. We just jump from like Noah getting this offer to the end of the book. And I was like, wait, so we've shown that this Greaves guy, can just flat out kill people who try to squeal. So what did Noah do? So I don't have no idea how it was resolved. So the idea was there. The execution was trash. And I'm going to find it again and put the screenshot here, but there was someone in one of their reviews said that it's important to note who the publisher of this book is. And I have only just recently started to look at publishers because of everything going on with Wednesday Books and before that a few others and stuff. So I never paid attention to publishers, and I'm starting to now. And the publisher of this apparently split from a group of sci-fi publishers because they were leaning more towards a conservative side, is what the review said. And they said that's probably why books like this, if you look at their publishing history under that publisher, tend to have more questionable main characters, where they tend to do more of the old school type opinions on women and minorities in their sci-fi. And this is the publisher of this. So it's probably why something like this wouldn't have been picked up by Tor or something else, according to what this reviewer said. So I think this for me is like a sign to maybe start looking at who is publishing things when I pick them up, because of the way that Audible does their free, their like plus catalog, is that it's a lot of like smaller publishers and stuff. And honestly, I'm so frustrated, and I could have DNF'd this at any point when I started getting frustrated, but I was like, okay, I'm just going to finish it today. It was read so slowly that I was able to turn it up to 2.25, I think, and still able to fully understand everything that happened because of how slowly this was read. So I finished this in like 5 hours or something. And I kept reading because I am that person. That's just who I am. I rarely DNF, and I probably should have with this one, but at the same time, I wouldn't have had something to rant about. or to contribute, because I am the only 1-star review of this book on Audible, and I believe I'm one of like 2 1-stars on Goodreads. And Storygraph you can't sort, so I didn't really like go through all of it. I just kind of like scrolled, and other people had similar opinions of me but gave it a 3. So I am just a little more harsh than other people. And I wanted a fun story about like the experience that you would have first domesticating a dragon, okay? Give me some of the ridiculous things of them like destroying your house, and like some like even some Jumanji-esque like scenes of them getting loose and running through the city. Like give me like, this could have been so many different things, and instead it was this weird story where Dan Cobalt just flexed his knowledge muscles at us and interjected all sorts of weird science facts that were unnecessary to the story. So, I don't recommend this book, and I'm really disappointed. But I'm glad I read it now instead of for Smaugust when I was reading dragon books. So, read it if you want. Tell me if you do.